what we know from our experiences in order to make your lives a little easier, your websites more student-friendly, and ultimately your community colleges more successful. I'm Meg Lithick, and I'm joined today by Eugene Ernsberger. And I believe we are trying to share Eugene's screen. There we go. Okay. So we are part of the Indianapolis-based design agency Smallbox. Prior to our roles here, we've had nearly 40 years combined experience in digital strategy. Eugene in the agency space, as well as an adjunct instructor at IUPUI or IUND, and I in the nonprofit field, and most recently in higher ed as the director of brand engagement at Butler University. In the next hour and a half, we are going to move quickly through a lot of practical tips and tools that we hope that you can begin to use immediately as you think about analyzing and optimizing your website for results. One housekeeping note before we dive in. We're going to have about 20 to 30 minutes at the end of the workshop to answer any questions that you may have, but please feel free to add your questions to the comments along the way. The team will compile them as we go along, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can at the end. Okay, grab a drink, grab your lunch if you're here on the East Coast time, and let's get going.
So some fun statistics to start off our conversation, just about the importance of college websites. This is from a study done in 2019 by the education think tank EAB. They found that college websites are the #1 source of information for prospective students, and it's where they go to investigate opportunities, explore alignment, and seek information that will inform their decision. In addition to that, and from that same study, they found that students visit an average of 5 times before making a decision, which indicates your website is a part of the discussion and at different points of their decision-making process before they ever arrive at an actual conversion point. So that's a lot of time that you are connected to people as they go through this potentially life-changing decision. Some more statistics here. So 88% of users are less likely to return to a website due to bad user experience, and that could mean a failed attempt to actually use functionality, some kind of major malfunction, or it could just be a clunky user experience, something that feels awkward to use or doesn't quite match what they expected when they engage with your institution and other locations. Another point is that 75% of the credibility, judgments based on credibility, are based on the website's aesthetics. So sometimes we think about how we think of the look and feel of our websites as something that is on top of the user experience, but in fact, it's very much so entwined with that user experience. And if something doesn't feel like it's hitting the right notes from a visual perspective, or that it's off-brand, or that it just doesn't pay attention to the details of web design, that can lead to a feeling of mistrust. So to sum up, small calibrations in improving your user experience and your UI, and making sure that those decisions are based on what students are looking for, what they need, and our other conversations with those students outside of a website, that can have an enormously positive ripple effect.
So in our first workshop, we walked through a method called human-centered design that can help you transform the way you approach your website design and strategy, thinking about students first. You can check out that 90-minute workshop at luminafoundation.org/challenge. There, you're also going to find tools which accompany the workshop that you can immediately begin to use to implement your student-centered approach. We really encourage you to check that out. That's going to be really high level. But today, we are going to drill into more specific details. We're going to get into the tactical level ways to analyze and optimize your website for success. We'll start with a walkthrough of an auditing tool called Google Lighthouse, which is an amazing, in my opinion, an amazing free resource that's really simple to use. We'll then run through some best practices for SEO, accessibility, user experience, mobile experience, and content strategy. So a lot to cover in this time period together. And then finally, we'll discuss how we measure success through a quick tutorial of Google Analytics, what to track, how to consider metrics alongside qualitative data, and finally, how to use analytics in combination with student-centered design methods to ensure that you are constantly learning and iterating to support your primary audience. For community colleges, we know that ensuring that prospective students can find your website and navigate to your content and actions necessary is imperative to your success, but it's also imperative to the success of your prospective students. As Eugene mentioned, the website is the #1 way that students make a decision as to whether to apply and attend your college. Because of that, it is really important to continually analyze and optimize your site through a student-centered lens. We all know that we can do better, but how do we get started? Where do we begin? Luckily, there are tools available for free that can help you evaluate your site's performance and even provide helpful tutorials on how to improve. So Eugene's gonna walk us through some of the basics of Google Lighthouse. And I will tell you, as someone who was in your shoes, who worked in higher ed on the web, the first time I used this tool, it was life-changing. It really made me sigh with relief. There were so many things that I knew that I should be monitoring and we should be monitoring and improving, but I didn't know where to begin. All of those considerations felt overwhelming. But this tool, just like its name suggests, really provided a path forward.
So before we dig into Google Lighthouse, I just wanted to talk about, as you approach auditing or assessing your website, there's a few different lenses that we want to look through to identify those opportunities. Some of those can be automated and rely on machines to provide us some direction, and others require an individual to do more of a qualitative analysis. Some things are a bit more subjective. And so when we think about quantitative audits, we can think about things like accessibility at a high level. We can run reports that will tell us, here are things that will be problems from a code perspective and from a visual perspective when it comes to accessibility. Search engine optimization, there are components to that can be automated that are just quantitative. We can run reports that will tell us exactly what we need to adjust there. Conversion rate optimization, that's something where we can just track using Google Analytics. We can get a sense for how our sites are converting. And then performance, which has become more and more of something that marketing teams have to be aware of now. The actual load time and how Google tracks the performance of our mobile websites. So those are things that we can get feedback on from running reports. And then over here, we have some other things that require an individual to, with knowledge of the goals and the website design to address. So #1 on that list is the design appropriate and compelling when it comes to how the brand is applied? Does it match the brand, and is it done in a way that is engaging for folks? And then reaching an ideal audience. We can learn some things from Google Analytics, but we also, that will give us information about who is coming to our website. But when it comes to who's not coming to our website, that's something that requires a little bit more of a strategic effort. And that strategic effort then typically leads into some kind of SEO practices and maybe campaigns and things of that nature. And then adhering to usability conventions. Some things will show up in an automated report, but others are just, you have to get a feel for using your website. And we will talk about a handful of those types of things later in our conversation today. Right now, I want to jump into talking about Google Lighthouse as a tool for getting started in auditing, or auditing to get started. Google Lighthouse is, it will give you with a click of a button, it will give you a report of your site's health through some high-level categories. Running a report is super simple. You can go to web.dev/measure in a web browser. You can enter the URL of the page you wish to audit, and then just click Run Audit. you'll get a report that looks something like this with these 4 high-level categories of performance, accessibility, best practices, and SEO. And then within it, you can drill down into each category and you'll find a list of issues and opportunities for improvement. And then clicking into those, you can get even more information. Usually it includes a better description of the issue. It has a link to for further learning to learn more about how you might address this issue. And then it'll also highlight the specific elements that were flagged in the audit.
So we're going to walk through some of the things that might be uncovered in Google Lighthouse, talk about other things that might not, but find ways that you can analyze through the lens of Google Lighthouse, through the lens of other categories along the way. We're going to start first with search engine optimization, which is definitely a part of Google Lighthouse. SEO is critical for almost every single website out there, but I'm going to argue that community colleges in particular need to lean on SEO. And here's why. We know that many of the students who attend community college are non-traditional, which means that they are on another path or haven't explored a lot of different opportunities because of life circumstances when they face a moment of great challenge or great opportunity. And in that moment, when they're considering maybe what's next for them, they've got lots of questions and lots of explorations that occur. Conversations with friends and family are part of that. But where do you turn when you've got questions? You turn to the internet. So in those moments when prospective students are exploring their options and looking for answers, you want to ensure that your community college is one of the solutions presented. And focusing on SEO is exactly how you do that, how you get to that top page of search results. A lot of us know that we should be considering our SEO strategies, but many of us are overwhelmed by the mystery of it all or the perceived work involved. For folks who have traditional marketing and communications backgrounds like myself, it feels really technical. It feels a bit fuzzy because of that. And at times, it just feels like another mountain that we've got to climb when we're too busy. But honestly, there are some really simple ways that you can do, simple things that you can do immediately to improve your results. At its most basic, SEO drives more traffic to your site, thus leading to more applications. But more importantly, it connects people to you, ultimately giving them a better chance at fulfillment in their lives through education. So Eugene's going to walk us through some SEO basics and share some tips to improve.
Yes, just in case we needed further emphasis on why this is important, 95% of students researching colleges online only click results from the first page of their search engine listings. And this is a fairly common, this is true of most entities, whether it's college or otherwise, but as Meg mentioned, for colleges, it may be even more important. But yeah, rarely do we get to the second page and it drops off exponentially after that. So how can we make sure that our site shows up for the searches that we intend? There are a few factors that impact SEO that I want to talk about. There's a great deal of depth that we could go into, but these are in my opinion, the highest level and most important to address at first. Technical optimization, which is just making sure that our content can be understood and indexed by search engines. Content is more so about what it is that we're being indexed for. And then mobile experience, which we'll get into later in the talk in more detail, but I just wanted to acknowledge that is a factor now. That wasn't the case years ago, but now Google includes mobile performance and experience as part of its algorithm for page ranking. So some of this may be review for you folks, but part of optimizing for search engines is just first recognizing that in order that Google actually wants to understand your content. That is its primary function for at least the search portion of Google, is to provide relevant and accurate results for searches, which means they want to understand your content. We need to help as much as we can in that process. So that means just like a newspaper, we have ways that we as people who just scour with our eyes, we have ways of categorizing content and recognizing what's related to what and what is the most important thing on a page. Well, bots don't necessarily see in the same way that we see. So we need to provide some structure. So we want to make sure that in HTML, we have tags that indicate what a piece of content is about or what its role is in the entire document. So we want to make sure that that our highest level headlines are H1s, our second level H2s, third level H3s, etc. And headline tags go from H1 to H6. This process of making sure that our content is using the appropriate tags that will help search engines understand our content is called semantic markup. And you can see here an example of how that applies to a community college website where you have your H1s and H2s helping the user know visually, as well as someone who's not viewing this with their eyes, understand through the code what is the most important and what is the content related to that, and then what is the second most important and what's the content related to that. This is also something that is important for accessibility. A lot of times things that you fix for SEO and things that you fix for accessibility go hand in hand, because often we're solving problems for people who don't see in a traditional way, and bots, frankly, see in a non-traditional way.
One note that I'll add, Eugene, is that a lot of people think that headers are just for design, to make things look good, and that is absolutely not the case. They are good for design, but more importantly, they are used for SEO and for accessibility reasons.
Absolutely. And I failed to mention that this is a very small thing to fix. It may require some assistance from your IT team, but most websites are built in some kind of modular or templated fashion. So finding where a tag is supposed to be in H1 in your content is usually something that can be fixed in one location and then propagated throughout your website. But I'm surprised often at how many times I find content just wrapped in a generic tag, which it's just a wasted opportunity and actually an issue for accessibility too. So a few more things that we'll highlight from technical optimization. We obviously don't have time to get into the full breadth, but here's some of the things I see most often. One, broken links. So whenever you're moving from an old site to a new site, or you're changing out content, you're moving a page or deleting a page, you want to make sure that you're providing a redirect for that, so that when someone accesses that link for that old page, they're redirected to something useful. And having bots come upon broken links also is just not helpful for understanding your content. Missing page title attributes, so that every page should have a unique and meaningful title, but that and it shouldn't be omitted. If it is, that's a big miss for SEO, because that's one of the highest ranking opportunities for keyword tracking and influencing the page rank. Second, and this is another one that is related to accessibility as well, just making sure that you provide alternative text for images. So if someone cannot see an image, how can we provide, there's an attribute in the code, but in a CMS, there should be a way for you to add this alternative text. It's just a text description of what the image is about, which allows bots and people with visual impairments to understand what that is from a content perspective. And then lastly, we have blocked and unlinked pages. Blocked pages are just pages that for one reason or another just aren't able to be indexed. Usually it's due to some a tag in the code that actually tells the Google not to index this page. There are, I've seen full sites have this problem where someone forgot to turn off an option, and so the whole site was failing to be indexed. So that's just something you want to make sure you talk about with your IT teams. Make sure all pages that you want to have tracked can be tracked. And then unlinked pages. These are orphaned pages that just don't exist within the navigation. There may be logical reasons for that, but you want to provide a sitemap.xml file that it's just a file that search engines know to look for, that will provide a way for them to scour every page on your site that you want to have indexed, outside of having to go through the navigation, which is how it would track those otherwise. All right, let's talk about content. This isn't there's plenty of depth here, but we're going to focus at the high level on keywords, noting that that density is not a significant factor in rankings, not anymore. And it's kind of an ancient way in which people would try to climb the page ranks was stuffing keywords. That's what they call a black hat tactic. There's a lot of those where people have tried to game the Google algorithm, and you can kind of do it for a little while, but Google's, as I said earlier, Google's goal is actually to create relevant results. So Google is also trying to counteract those manipulations. So your goal with content shouldn't be to stuff it with as many relevant keywords as possible, but in fact, focusing on creating unique and descriptive page titles and high-level headlines is going to be more impactful to those page ranks and save you a lot of trouble. It allows you to write more organic and frankly, just more valuable to humans content. So when you think about what your page is titled and the headline for your page, and H1s and H2s in particular, those are the most significant for the Google algorithm. But you want to make sure that those are the descriptive of the content. You don't need to, be bend over backward to squeeze in keywords, but that's the opportunity maybe to consider your keyword strategy and how it's going to be made manifest on the page. A quick note about backlinks. That's another high-ranking component of PageRank is how many highly ranked sites link to your site as reference. So people in the past have tried to find ways to buy links or do other things like that. I would say avoid those types of tactics and just go back to that student-centered mindset of creating meaningful content that resonates with your audience and your partners in your industry. And then that should establish your site as a valuable and relevant resource, which should organically create those backlinks. Focusing on the meaning and reaching those people where they, where your solution meets their problem will absolutely produce better results. And a quick side note here, avoid generic link text. This is not something that is going to help you like skyrocket in the page ranks, but it reinforces this concept. It's actually more of a mentality that you need to approach your content with, where just understand that Google wants to understand your content. And so we want to give Google every opportunity, and other search engines, we want to give them every opportunity to better understand our content. Generic link text does not help humans or bots understand our content. And you see this a lot. Click here, learn more, things that, they make sense as an action, but they don't actually provide better context for what we're about to engage with. So it's better for people and it's better for search engines if we can replace that with something that is a bit more meaningful. So making sure that if it's an action that you like applying or something like that, that apply is a part of that phrase. Or if it's to more content, what can you give an indication of what that content's going to be? So if it's a blog article, could you indicate what that, to learn more about a certain thing, or read so-and-so's story. That type of approach will lead to better results.
So SEO and accessibility really go hand in hand. If you are doing SEO right, it's going to help accessibility. And if you're doing accessibility right, it's going to help your SEO. As I'm sure almost all of you know, nearly every higher ed institution in the country is obligated to make your websites accessible to those with disabilities. But we shouldn't just be paying attention to accessibility out of fear of litigation. I'm embarrassed to say that early on in my time at Butler, we did not have an accessible website, and you're going to see it in a few slides. Despite the government policies in place, we just didn't do it because we simply didn't know. Strangely enough, I have the basketball team to thank for bringing that to my attention, and here's why. After a really successful run in the NCAA basketball tournament, we got a call from a lawyer who happened to be calling every school that made it to the Sweet 16, threatening a lawsuit against us if we did not improve the accessibility of our websites. The threat was a very necessary and successful way to alarm schools and tell them, as we were riding pretty high on our March Madness wins, to do better. And I'm happy to say that at Butler we did. For community colleges who are leading the way in providing accessible education to all, focusing on accessibility in the web space is an imperative. It's not just a legal imperative, it's a moral imperative. We should focus on accessibility to ensure that everyone has access to the opportunities education provides. Making sure that every person from your college, every person who touches that website's backend, every content contributor, every person on the IT team that's a part of this, understands this importance as well, is really truly how you're going to gain success. Eugene is going to show us some of the basics so that you can all begin to become advocates for accessibility within your own organizations.
Yes, so fortunately, we don't have to do this on our own. Meg mentioned there are some ways that you can gain visibility on these often hidden accessibility concerns, but there is this, there are guidelines, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and those are provided, those provide technical specifications related to accessibility, and it helps us make accommodations for folks with a variety of disabilities. Often we consider visual disabilities first, just because for a lot of us that's a foreign experience, and it's one that's difficult to access when we engage with our websites. But there are other concerns as well when it comes to their auditory, cognitive, neurological, physical, and speech disabilities. So as the web becomes even more interactive, we also have to consider how that impacts folks who perhaps perceive things a bit differently due to disability. So when it comes to accessibility audits, Google Lighthouse will give you a nice list, as we talked about, where you can drill down and say, oh, I need to address that specifically here. I like to use a tool called Wave as well, which there's a screenshot here below, but it gives you a nice visual version, which I find super helpful, and it's a lot of fun to then make changes and see all these little bugs disappear as you make your improvements. So but there really is no excuse anymore for not knowing and not knowing very specifically what needs to be addressed. I should mention that you can do this just like Google Lighthouse on a page-by-page basis. I recommend, if you're going to take accessibility seriously, there is a site-wide audit that can be done for a fee, but you can run that audit at the start of a cycle and then just make it your imperative to address those concerns throughout your entire website. And you can approach it, you can piecemeal that out over the course of a period of time. But as I said earlier, since most websites use some kind of template or modular system, a lot of times you just need to target or zero in on exactly where this is in a template, address that there, and usually it will then propagate throughout the rest of your website. So I'm going to highlight a few of those areas that come up most often. We mentioned alt text earlier, or alternative text, in the context of SEO. Again, here you want to have a brief description of every image that is relevant for the content. Now, there are some scenarios where you don't want a screen reader. That's how someone with a visual impairment, they would use a tool called a screen reader, where to actually read through the text. It's another reason why semantic markup is important, because it uses that structure to actually read content to an individual. But it will read the descriptions of text. But there's sometimes you might have some ephemeral visuals from your brand or something where it's just decorative. You actually don't want to provide text for some of those things that would just make that experience of reading it. It would just make it more complicated and more confusing. You still need to provide an alt tag in those scenarios. It just should be empty, and then it knows to skip over those. Another one.
Here's that site. Here's that unaccessible site.
Yes, this is from a Butler University page that would be flagged for a few things, but one of those would be color contrast. And you also see the consistent learn more that we talked about earlier. But here we're talking about color contrast, and that's one of those that there was a period of time where that was somewhat ambiguous, but folks have gone to effort to define the specific ratio that needs to be met. It's not super meaningful to people. I don't know what that ratio means. I can't look at two colors and know what the ratio is. So you have to use tools. This will show up in accessibility audits, but also there are tools now that can be integrated with your design team or your partner's design teams. Figma, I know, has a plugin, and I'm sure there are others that allow you to, as you design, check for accessibility concerns when it comes to color contrast. So whether you're designing it or someone else, you're using a partner, you should feel confident that meeting color contrast standards should be just part of your process.
One thing that I'll point out about color contrast, a lot of us, and this was the case when I was at Butler, have brand colors that aren't actually great for the web. They may be really wonderful for marketing pieces, for banners on campus and for other things, but when it comes to the web, they don't work. And so one thing that we did at Butler is we added more depth and saturation to a lot of our brand colors. Nobody on the outside really knew what we were doing and could tell the difference, but it made a huge difference in the accessibility of our website. We deepened the pinks, we deepened the blues, we deepened the yellows in order to make them web friendly. Another thing that I would advise you if you are on the marketing team to do is, as you're considering your brand colors from the very start, if you're rebranding, to make sure that they are web accessible, right? And to bring that into the consciousness around your web colors.
Excellent. So I mentioned that often we think about certain disabilities and how they impact digital experiences, but one that gets overlooked sometimes is just auditory disabilities or impairments. So when it comes to things like video is a wonderful thing to include in your website, and it's become more and more available. But we want to make sure that when we present something that relies on audio, that we're also providing a text-based alternative. So you can providing captions is an option, and there's also ways in which you could link to a full transcript for people who perhaps just want to read the full content in a more narrative-based format.
Okay, so in our first workshop, which I encourage you all to check out if you didn't see it live, we spent the entire time chatting about the process of student-centered design and how you and your teams can employ methods and tools to optimize the user experience. So it's a full 90-minute workshop on user experience. I think the biggest takeaway from that conversation was making sure that you and your team approach the website through the lens of your users. Just as accessibility does that across the board, we need to think about our users. Optimizing the experience to align with their needs and expectations. We know that websites, again, are the top information source for making a college decision. I'm going to say it over and over and over again. So ultimately, in becoming more student-centered, you will drive more students to explore your website, to engage with your website, and ultimately to apply. So it's a good business decision too. I'm not overstating it when I say that optimizing the user experience can increase your application rate. Over and over and over again, studies show that it really makes a difference in conversions. And in turn, it can also help the quality of your admission. So as you are able to connect with more and more people, you may be able to get more and more applications, but even better applicants over time. In turn, improving your bottom line and connecting more individuals with the benefits of post-secondary education. There are some universal basics that should always be considered when optimizing your website through the lens of UX. And we're going to start with the most basic thing. I think if I was to underscore anything outside of that 90-minute workshop where we talk about very specific student-centered things, one thing as far as user experience is considered or concerned is this number. 79% of users, and I think this is an underestimate, 79% of users only scan the web pages they come across. They scan them, they do not read them. If we're going to use our websites to communicate what folks need to know in a way that is successful for them and for us, we need to keep this number at the center of our focus. And everyone who contributes to your website strategy needs to understand this number as well. So those faculty members, those staff members that like to write long dissertations for their web pages need to see this number and need to understand the impact of it.
Yeah, I would, if you want to learn more about just how people read, there's a great foundational book called Don't Make Me Think. And it really helped me in my, when I produce websites, content and design. Essentially, they describe it as we're designing billboards. And so we should get very good at designing billboards. Just acknowledge how fast people are moving and take advantage and lean into convention where possible.
As you can see in this heat map that tracks the way eyeballs move across a screen, no matter the website, whether it's a community college, whether it's a Google page, whether it is a store's website, the vast majority of users scan a page using the F pattern. So this pattern right here, starting at the top left and moving right, then moving down and scanning and moving down and scanning. However, you'll notice that often we start to scan the full, we stop scanning the full width of the page and shorten that over time. This is why menus are typically at the top of the page. And I would encourage you to consider where your calls to action are, right? Are they in that sort of dead zone over there on the farther right-hand side? And could you move them more into the scanning zone? Making sure that you're recognizing the F pattern in the way that people are viewing and using your website, and finding the information that they need. Another thing that when we think about scanning are bullet points, right? And bullet points and lists aren't just for BuzzFeed. I know that they often get associated with sort of pop culture-y websites, but that there's a reason why BuzzFeed uses them and leans on them so heavily. They work. As we consider how to present content, where possible, use ways to break up the content so that it caters to that 79% who scan. This can be uncomfortable, again, for academics and those in the academic setting who don't want to dumb down language. But ultimately, you don't have to dumb down language. You just have to break it apart in an appropriate way to be most effective in its delivery. And another way that you can break down content are these chunks of information. Chunking is a way that you can, other than bullet points, break apart information that is related but also separate so that people can scan the page, they can find and rest on an idea, on a phrase, on a headline. They can find and scan the text more easily. There's a lot of white space when you chunk like this, as you can see. And this is a phrase that the more I say it, the more uncomfortable I get with the phrase chunking, but it is a design phrase in website. White space is okay. White space allows your eyeballs to know where to go and helps highlight critical information. It makes the scanning easier for the user. So if it feels sparse, that's okay because it's helping people find the right information and directing them to where they need to go. And then line length and line height are other considerations in making your website scannable and readable. These are two what I call Goldilocks examples that Google provides. On the top and the bottom, the blue text indicates the length and spacing that are just right. This can change, this just right can change based on the fonts that you use. But a general rule of thumb for body copy is that lines should stretch no more than 10 words across on the page, and that spacing between lines should be no more than 1.5 spaces. I will say again that this changes based on fonts and font sizes and types, but we have seen because of the way that the designs work now, and they can expand and contract depending on the screen, Some people don't consider the line length in particular, and it can stretch and stretch and stretch to an impossible place, right? That's not legible. That's not helpful for people to be able to scan it and to read it easily. So making sure that we cut it off in the code at some point as we're thinking about web design, and talking to our designers and talking to our IT team or talking to our web partners to make sure that they take these things into consideration as they're considering the website. I'll also let you know that, sometimes these things, you have to look on multiple different platforms and kind of scan your own site across, your laptop, across your mobile, across a larger screen that may be only used by certain people, but making sure that universally these rules are still intact, so that everybody has a good experience with your website. We talked earlier about, oh, go ahead, Eugene.
Well, I was going to just add that, I might be a snob about this, but nothing is a quicker trigger for me about trusting or not trusting a website than attention to detail when it comes to typography. When things are just crammed together or these line lengths are unruly, a lot of times I just wonder how much this institution is actually paying attention or cares about everything if they're not willing to pay attention to these details.
That's exactly it. We spoke earlier about that statistic where people, drop off a site and don't come back if they don't feel like the design is credible. And as we're talking about the quality of our institutions, as we're trying to promote the quality of our institutions, this is one really easy, simple way to elevate the quality. And then finally, another way to really improve your user experience of your website is to pay attention to the forms that you present to your users. Are they intuitive? Are they simple to move through? Are there cues when you've filled in areas of content? If it is a long form, can you break it up to feel more manageable and intuitive for people so that they don't look at it and feel overwhelmed and want to abandon it immediately? That's just a psychological thing. It doesn't mean that you're tricking them. It just helps them along the way. I'm referencing Butler because it's an easy one for me to reference. And in this case, you'll see that they broke up a form into 3 different screens, showing the user where they are in the process by highlighting the number above. And they also provide status cues when someone takes an action. This may seem really obvious, but I've seen it done so poorly that you don't actually know when it's happening. Making sure that the boxes are clearly filled in so that when you click on something, it is obvious that it recognized that you clicked on it. Also giving status cues like once you've completed an action, highlighting that next button so that people understand, oh, it's time to move on to the next page. These are really simple things that can make a big difference, especially when you think about the importance that some of the forms on our sites provide, right? Some of these forms are vital to the business operations of our organizations, to making sure that students get the information that they need, that they are understanding our financial aid, they are understanding the application process. So making sure these things work across multiple platforms, across multiple different users, depending on what they're doing, is going to be a really great way to optimize user experience and ultimately to optimize your business because of it. Okay, so let's drill in a little farther into user experience and talk about mobile UX. According to some industry benchmarks, 41.6% of all higher ed traffic is on a mobile device. That's almost neck and neck with desktop. And depending on the socioeconomic makeup of your prospective student population, mobile might actually be higher. However, when we design websites, or even when we test them internally or with users, we often just consider the desktop experience. As we learned earlier, prioritizing and optimizing the mobile experience will help with SEO, but more importantly, it will help improve access and experiences for all users, ultimately deepening the connection between your college and your prospective student.
Yes, and again, Google Lighthouse takes away our excuse for not knowing about some of these issues. So it's a wonderful and confrontational tool. But when it comes to performance, as you can see, when it measures performance, it focuses on mobile. So we need to make sure that our site is loading as fast as possible and that we pay attention to these opportunities that Google Lighthouse reports, because some of them will be obvious, like things like making sure that our images are not enormous. Simply compressing and sizing images appropriately will help significantly with page load. There's also a technique called lazy loading, where images that aren't on screen don't load until they enter the viewport. Those things can be helpful, but Google gets much more specific, and it gives you some indication of how Google thinks about performance, which is definitely, until you run Lighthouse, it is hard to fully recognize. So there are some things that you can do easily on your own, and some things you'll have to dig into deeper based off of these results. There's also some technical considerations when it comes to mobile that get overlooked, because that might not be how we primarily, as the ones making the website, that might not be how we primarily engage with it. So first thing to consider is that connections are not as reliable and maybe slower. So we want to make sure that we are optimizing our media elements. We don't want to waste bandwidth where we don't need to. We want to make sure that we are accounting for the fact that there are no hover states on touch devices. That seems maybe not super important until you realize how often you rely on hover states to give you more information or to confirm that something's clickable. So when it comes to mobile, if you have a call to action, there should be no mistaking that is a clickable element. Or if you on desktop are relying on a hover state to give more information, consider how you might make that a click instead, or at least in the mobile experience. And then lastly, there is actually a standard radius for tap based on research. But there's a fat thumb problem sometimes, where you have things that are too close together and not enough room for your action. So aim for about 48 pixels of tap radius to make sure that someone doesn't accidentally tap something they didn't intend to. And one place this shows up often, or where I see mobile issues, is in the menu systems. Universities and colleges have typically a pretty broad set of information that we need to neatly categorize in our information architecture. Well, sometimes we rely on that hover state, or a quote unquote drop down menu, to provide more context for that top level item. Also, on desktop, we can click easily that top level item and go to a page, or we could select one of these items that showed up that appeared when we hovered over that item. On mobile, we don't have that luxury. We have to make a decision. What happens when we tap that word? Does it open a submenu, or does it go to a page? And that's just something that needs to be sorted out. In my experience, one of the best patterns to follow is to allow those pages to click through, but also make a clear indicator of how to expand and contract a menu. But you should also consider the language that you're using to make sure that you don't need to see that submenu in order to make a decision. And then that submenu is then present on the following page in a way that allows someone to see, oh, there's depth inside of this category or this section. And then last, I just, it's somewhat obvious, but as we constrain our device width, our content squeezes and it gets longer and longer. So there are opportunities typically to both make things more scannable and collapse content. Is there a way that we could have content collapse into an accordion pattern, where we can scan those headlines and click on something we want to get more information without having to leave the page? That's one way that you could potentially shorten your pages so that you don't get into these lengthy scrolls. You also want to make sure that when there are clear calls to action, that we haven't waited to the end of the page to make that available. If in these scenarios where our content is super long, how can we make sure we make those CTAs available earlier?
Speaking of content, let's dig into content strategy. And I could spend a couple of workshops here alone, but we have about 10 minutes that we're going to spend, give or take, in this area. And we're going to go high level and kind of breeze through a bunch of things that are absolutes, right? The amount of content that is available on college websites can be staggering, as Eugene was underscoring about the menus. And for many of us also, the amount of people that are responsible for that college content can be pretty overwhelming. Whether you are in charge of every single page of your site, I hope not, but if you are, or you have faculty and staff scattered throughout the college providing content, focusing on an ongoing content strategy and ensuring that every contributor understands the basics is critical. It goes without saying that without attention to content, no matter how much time you spend optimizing your site, your efforts will fall flat. Understanding the basics of how to be first student-focused in your approach, and second, how to maintain content over a long time period is critical to your success in attracting and attaining students. So, what are some really high-level content best practices? Well, first, thinking about identity and position, right? Who you are as a college. Be consistent in the visual brand and brand messaging throughout the site, from page to page, in order to keep people aware of who you are and orient them to some degree. Also, make sure that the brand is consistent, that your menuing is consistent, that if you've got a logo, that it is consistently found from page to page, right? So that there are cues throughout as to who you are and what you do, no matter where people come into the site. Also, brand messaging, making sure that you think about it beyond just the home page, right? And infusing it throughout landing pages, throughout major pages of content throughout the entire college website. Another one is consistent tone and accessible language. Thinking about the students first, being student-centered in the way that you consider tone and language, making sure that you're using vocabulary that is accessible to them. And again, student-focused content throughout. So thinking about when you're creating content on the site, not just in the tone, not just in the words that are used, but also considering why they're coming to your website. What problem are they seeking to solve? And what drove them to seek this website as the solution? And posing the content as solutions to those things. Coming at it from a framing of why the student would be here and solving that problem for them, or taking advantage of that opportunity of why they're there. This is related to SEO and scannability, but appropriate and consistent use of headings. This is the easiest way to think about as content as it relates to SEO, making sure that your headings, especially the major headings on pages, at the beginning of pages, but also throughout, are consistent, that use language that is appropriate to your users, that aren't insider language about academia, but are using the types of words that people would use if they were Googling or searching for your community college online. And then the ability to share and highlight timely information and stories. I've seen so many websites that have very locked down websites, right? And that the only pages that they can change are the home pages, and everything else is very evergreen, very locked down. Making sure, if you can, that there are ways to bring timely content throughout the site so that your college is relevant and seems vibrant to those, that it feels like it's a part of the community that people are also a part of, and it's responding to the times and responding to the community around it.
Yeah, and as we engage with some of these questions, if you don't know what content to create, the first workshop that covers more of it outlines a process, a student-centered process that's very helpful in defining those things so that you can get to this point.
So as we go a little bit more specific, homepage absolutes. When we think about content, usually the first place we consider is the homepage. And for most of us, the homepage is where a lot of people enter into our site. It's not the majority oftentimes, but it's a lot of people enter into it in that, on the homepage. So making it immediately accessible in messaging, tone, imagery, and design is important. In my experience, there are 4 universal elements that make an enormous difference in the success of your homepage. And those are brand, making sure that it's clear who you are and what you do. Upon entry to the website, it is immediately clear that you are a unique organization, that you've got something to say, and that you've expressed yourself through the visuals and through messaging. This is the opportunity to really let your brand shine, both visually and through communication. Just be cautious not to overwhelm your audience with too much fluff and not enough utility. But upon entering, it is obvious who you are and who you do it for and why you're special. Audience, thinking about prioritizing content, again, for the prospective student. We talk about this a lot in the first workshop, but it is critical that your homepage speaks first and foremost to your primary audience and doesn't try to be all things for all people. That's when a lot of websites fail to really direct prospective students into the funnel, is when they're trying to hit alumni, trying to hit community, trying to hit current students in the messaging as you enter into the homepage. Make sure that you are very specific in the way that you approach your prospective student and welcome them onto your website. All of those other audiences are important. There are ways to capture them, but really prioritizing that prospective student is going to be critical to the success of your website and to your community college. One way to do this is through representation, making sure that there are images of people that are diverse and authentic. People are drawn to images of people, right? I see it so many websites where it's a lovely campus picture when you come to the website instead of students. Prospective students want to see themselves represented and they want to feel like they belong at your school. While you can't showcase every single person, be certain that the photos that you do show present the diversity of your student body in a really authentic way. And then finally, a homepage absolute is clear, obvious, and specific calls to action. So there are two things that you need to think about when you're thinking about homepage calls to action. One are pathways to critical actions for students, making sure that critical actions like apply, learn about the community college, sign up for a campus tour, those sorts of things that are critical to your admissions process are clear on the homepage. The other thing that you want to make sure are clear on the homepage are repeatable actions. If there's a process for application that people need to come back to over and over again, making sure that that button is there and very easily found. For current students, also making sure that calls to action to their repeatable actions are very obvious and easy to find as well on that homepage.
There's a study from 2009 that shows that not only do we look at eye tracking software shows that we look at the faces of people, so that's important for how we represent our university, but also that we look where those images look. So that's relevant for CTAs. Sometimes you can actually use the gaze of someone in the photo to actually point attention toward somewhere intentional.
So here's an example of a homepage that has all of the elements that we just talked about upon first scan. Within just a couple of seconds, you'll notice the brand, both a visual identity and simple messaging. You'll notice prospective students are prioritized in the content that is presented. You'll notice the authentic picture representing real students. And you'll also notice the immediate CTAs for both critical and frequent pathways. So a really good example of all of those elements in one place. Let's talk about landing pages. Sure, the homepage is where many of your audience members will enter into your website. But if you're combining your web content strategy with your marketing strategy, landing pages are also a really critical starting point for your website. A landing page is a page with a singular focus that you intentionally drive prospective students to in order to move them into your admissions funnel. Landing pages can be built specifically for email or digital marketing campaigns, but perhaps the best way to consider landing pages is through your SEO strategy. In order to combine your content strategy with that SEO strategy, and to create these landing pages, there's some really simple questions that you can ask yourself. Where are people entering into our site? And we'll talk about Google Analytics in a little bit because that's going to help you answer these questions. Where are people entering into our site? What pages are they landing on organically? Like, how are they getting into our site when it's not coming to the homepage? Can we find or refine pages that optimize this point of entry? So can we take advantage of where people are coming from and refine those pages in order to include maybe calls to action that get them more into the admissions funnel? And then conversely, it's beneficial to also ask, where do we want people to land on our website from a search? How do we build those pages that are optimized for search engines that also best serve the prospective student alongside our business goal? So thinking about those SEO tips that Eugene shared earlier. This is especially if you've got certain programs that are money makers for your community college, thinking about those pages as landing pages and really investing in the SEO strategy around those and the content strategy to make those landing pages in of themselves. I encourage you to put together a list of prioritized pages and then over time build them, perhaps using a template that ensures that they have the components listed here. The goal isn't to go crazy with landing pages because that actually could end up cannibalizing your own SEO strategy. But it's to be thoughtful and understanding how you can better drive your prospective student to exactly the content they seek. If the content of the page is tailored to your student, then they have to put less thought, time, and effort into entering into your admissions funnel, making their job easier, but as importantly, perhaps for you all, making your job a lot easier. This is an example of a really traditional landing page, right? This is what we've thought of in the past as a landing page. And this is a very extreme version of getting somebody into the marketing funnel. So I Googled nursing community college, and this is what the first link drove me to, was a page where I could enter in my information and learn more, right? This is a more university-centric approach to a landing page. The second page we're going to show you is a more student-centered landing page. Again, just searching for nursing and college, you can land on this page. But what it does is it provides a little bit more content, a little bit more context, a little bit more benefit for the student before you get into the calls to action. And in addition to that, these calls to action provide different pathways into where people are in their needs and their journey along the way. So as we think about refining the homepage, as we think about refining the landing page, how else can you approach content in order to optimize your site? Again, I could spend an entire workshop here, but we're going to move quickly through this list. Employing one or all of these techniques will incrementally make your roles easier and your website stronger. So having a style guide for all website contributors, which you can see a style guide from South Carolina here, just making sure that anybody who is touching your website, who is contributing to content, has a sense of tone, has a sense of voice, and understands the style that you use in order to contribute to the content and make it consistent across the website. Having a shared and updated resource hub for images, brand messaging, and best practices for all website contributors, whether that's on an intranet or a share drive somewhere, or whether that's actually on the web page like what South Carolina does, making sure that folks who are contributing to your website, because a lot of you are going to have to lean on those people for content creation, for page creation, have an understanding of the basics of all of this, but also have the resources to do it successfully. Speaking of resources to do it successfully, those web trainings, if you are bringing somebody in to contribute to your website, if it's not coming through your department, but through other areas, training them, giving them the basics, talking through some of these points that we've shared with you today, making sure that they understand the why you need a page title, making sure that they understand why you need alt text for images, or when you don't need alt text for images, so that everybody is playing on the same team towards the same goal. In the perfect world, and again, these are like layers of what you can do, having a review process. So not letting folks around the college publish directly to a live site, but filtering it through some sort of editorial process to ensure that folks are adding those alt tags, folks are using the style guide and doing all the things that need to be done in order to make your site successful from an SEO perspective, but also from a student-centered perspective. And then finally, thinking about an annual or biannual content audit calendar. Now, this is the ultimate, right? This is if you can get here, this is the ultimate. Looking at every page of your website on an annual basis or a biannual basis to ensure that the content is optimized, to make sure that pages need to be updated. And we're going to walk you through a little bit of what that might look like. If you are a well-oiled machine, again, this may be an annual thing, but if you don't have capacity to do it regularly, and I never did, I always wanted to get to this point, but we never had the chance to. It's imperative to at least do this process when you're prepping for a new website. So we got lots of questions the last time of like, what do I do or what can I do if I'm going into a new website redesign? This is like a basic 101 of what you can do. If you're launching a new brand or a new major initiative for your college, also, that would be a really good time to go through this process. It's like spring cleaning or purging for your website. It can be hard work, but it feels really good when you're done. Some of the benefits are that it helps you control site sprawl. So over time, more and more pages proliferate, right? More and more of those other contributors just like keep adding pages. So making sure that you pull back on that where possible and analyze what pages have been created. It helps you locate ghost pages. Ghost pages are pages that people are going to that are maybe unindexed, or you don't even know that they're not in your menu structure, or you don't even know they exist, but they're getting a lot of traffic for whatever reason. It helps you ID high performing content. It helps you inventory PDFs across your website. It helps you uncover structural issues. So all of these things that Google Lighthouse help kind of uncover as well. This process is a more structured sort of content view into it. And in doing so, it can improve UX and it can improve SEO. There's some tools that you can pay to do this and that will help you in this process. SEMrush and Screaming Frog are two of those paid tools. The way that I did it, and this feels archaic now, there weren't as many robust tools even 5 years ago when I was in this space. Google Analytics, you can do a view of every single page on your site and look at metrics attached to those pages, but also that's an inventory of pages that you can go to and evaluate based on different criteria that you need to evaluate it on. So speaking of Google Analytics, many of you may already know and track metrics for your website, while others may not. And as we've mentioned throughout today's workshop, analyzing your website over time for optimization is a critical component of a successful web strategy. Google Lighthouse is one method for that analysis, and Google Analytics is another. But I'll note that Google Analytics only shares part of the story. So this is like buyer beware. There's a little bit here that I'm going to share. For example, if we look at a couple of benchmarks for higher ed websites over the past decade, it appears on the surface that websites for colleges and universities are getting worse. The average pages per session has gone down nearly a page from 3.2 to 2.4. And the average time on the site has gone down from 3 minutes to 2 minutes. But that's not telling the whole picture, because what's happened is that UX has actually improved. And so people are needing to be on less pages, needing to spend less time on the website. That's why looking at metrics is really important. Looking at analytics is really important, but combining it with qualitative data is also really important as well. Okay, we're in the home stretch. Eugene, will you please walk us through some of the fundamentals of Google Analytics?
Sure. So just one quick note, this is big news in the analytics world. All standard universal analytics properties will be stop processing hits on July 1st of 2023. They're transitioning into Google Analytics 4. The experience of using it will not change that much, but how it tracks information does change a little bit. It's something to get familiar with. We don't have time to get into the whole range, but it would be unfair to not mention that as part of talking about where we are with Google Analytics today. So you can use Google Analytics to look at your top pages. Meg mentioned a few things about this a little bit ago, about how you can just analyze where are people going, where are they not going? How does that compare to where we expected people to go or where we want them to go? And then we can also look at these top pages and review them for conversion opportunities. Are we providing a way for them to, even if it's not a conversion to apply, are we providing a way for them to where that page, what that page services in our funnel? Are we providing an opportunity for them to go somewhere else? Are we moving them somewhere? And we can track that through Google Analytics as well. Another thing to consider is our bounce rate and our exit pages. So bounce rate is just single page sessions divided by all sessions, meaning people who come to our site and then leave without doing anything else. They don't go to another page, they don't take an action, they just drop out. So obviously that's not ideal. So we want to consider how what our rate is and how we might affect that. Also, our exit pages, we can see a full list of the pages that people, the last page that people visit, and that can be a good thing because there are pages that make sense for the people to exit. Those conversion points, that's a logical point where someone might exit a page. So we want to make sure that we're that those are being tracked as exit pages, or that those two ideas are fitting together, that people are exiting because they've reached the end of a flow, or in the cases where they're not, when we might consider, are we leaving them with a dead end on that page? Is there nowhere for them to go, or are we not enticing them to go to a logical next place? You see this a lot of times with like blog or news content where you reach the end of a long form article. That's a great opportunity to get someone into some other action. Whereas in some cases that just ends at the end of the page, and it's kind of like, all right, well, where do I go now? We want to provide conversion opportunities, and at the very least, opportunities to move to some more relevant content. Something else to consider with bounce rate is our site loading quickly enough? Are folks able to see what they need before they leave? Then another thing that I like to look at when I first enter into analytics is where are people coming from? So there's a range that can tell you that people are coming from search engines, social campaigns, and there's work that you can do to ensure that you can track even more clearly the specific campaigns that people are coming, are arriving through. Then there's direct traffic, which is very mysterious and difficult to shed light on. So this is another place where perhaps qualitative data can help, but that's where people actually enter your URL through into a browser and arrive that way. So that's something you may want to if you're seeing a lot of direct traffic, how can you learn more about that direct traffic? Some of that might be the content itself, how it's presented on the page. How can you see where people go from that direct traffic? There's a number of strategies that you could deploy, but knowing where people are coming from and how that fits with your overall strategy is super helpful. It's way better to know than not know, even if it doesn't match what you expect. The other thing is entry pages. So where are people landing? And how can we make sure that we're providing them with opportunities to go somewhere from there? So yes, the traffic sources will indicate how people are finding out about your organization. And then it will tell you where people are arriving other than the homepage. And then you can analyze, have we created paths for conversion or flows, intentional flows to more content related to that entry point? Something else I like to point out is that Google, by default, analytics won't show you keywords that people arrive from. You have to integrate with Google Search Console, another free tool. But once you do that, you can start to see a little bit more detail on like, oh, people arrived from from Google, but also from these keyword searches. And that's very helpful, obviously, in evolving your keyword strategy and your general SEO strategy. A sneaky one, though, is internal search. If you provide an internal search box, often there's you can filter a Google Analytics view to see searches that came through that path from that your search results show up under. And usually there's a way to actually see those keywords. That I've always found that, if nothing else, illuminating. And so, are there gaps in our navigation that cause people to frequently search for a specific term? If so, can we use that information to derive an improvement to our information architecture. If nothing else, you'll find some fun anomalies in there.
So we're running out of time and we want to make sure that we get to Q&A, but one thing that we want to underscore, and this was part of the note that I gave before we even got into Google Analytics, was first and foremost, just looking at metrics alone is enough to optimize your website. It is not. Making sure that you're looking at the student-centered experience, analyzing that. Our first workshop touched on that and really leaning into human-centered design and iterating over time. And what we mean by iterating over time is launch is just the beginning of your website. The real work happens over time. And spending energy and resources over time rather than just towards launch will actually help you save money and also increase revenue through more admissions and more applications. So please be sure to watch that first workshop, combine it with this workshop, and be really cognizant of bringing real people into your decision making as well. So with that, we want to thank you. We're going to move into Q&A, but I wanted to remind you that there are workshop recordings, there's the starter kit tools, and there are more community college opportunities at luminafoundation.org/challenge. We really appreciate your time, and I think we're ready for Q&A. Okay, so our first question, we get oriented, Eugene. Okay, so from Stephanie, she asks, what are the benefits of chatbots on websites, and how do you factor that in when you're thinking about accessibility, but also optimizing?
Sure. So that's a industry that's gained a lot of traction in the last handful of years, conversational interfaces, and it really intersects neatly with the demographics of folks searching for continued education and things of that nature, because a lot of those folks have grown up with conversational interfacer. That's just part of how they approach. Not everyone, obviously, but still there's a great deal of overlap there. So I think it's a great opportunity. As I've worked with websites at large, though, and with that rise of chatbots, there's been this kind of just acceptance of just like kind of taking the out of the box solution, just plopping a chatbot in the bottom right corner, and the lack of attention to detail there can be detrimental. So I would say, it's something that you should explore and experiment with, because I think the benefits are super valuable. But Meg and I were talking about chatbots not long ago, and you can't. There's a lot of things that seem like they might be quick fixes or way to circumvent problems that you have. And chatbots, if you think, well, I'm going to put a chatbot here and that will solve some of my UX problems, it could potentially create more problems. So I'm not suggesting that you should stay away from it. I actually think that it's a wonderful tool. I just think that you should also consider the way that it's implemented and iterate on that as well as part of your overall design efforts. Something being available 24 hours a day to answer questions is clearly a valuable thing. We talked about how people will come to your site 5 times. I wonder how many of those 5 times are at 11:30 at night or something, as you're finally sitting down to do some research. So I could see how it's super useful. Just it's power that needs to be wielded with respect and care.
Yeah, absolutely. And answering the question about optimizing, kind of looking at the metrics of chatbots, one of the things that I think is interesting about chatbots is that you can see what people are inquiring about. And you can have a better sense of what maybe some of the optimization for the site might look like based on the questions that you're getting in the chatbot. Another thing is engagement, right? You can look at how many people are coming to your website, but this is a way for them to engage in your website, and you can kind of get a sense of who the true, for lack of a better way of thinking about, who's truly interested, right? And if they're using that chatbot, they are truly interested in your community college, whether they are a prospective student or current student. It's an absolutely fantastic way to retain students. This is something that I think is that, you know, as we've been focusing a lot on prospective students, retainment in community college, I know, is a really, really important thing. And chatbots, if done properly and appropriately and responsibly, can really help with that retainment as well. Okay. Again, if you have questions, please add them into the chat or the Q&A here, and the team will relay them to us. Quickly, Eugene, we've got a question here about the book that you mentioned around UX.
Yeah, so I should have had it handy. It's right over there. I think Krug is the author, but there's a lot of helpful tips in there. He's it's at least on its second, if not third edition, but it's foundational to understanding how people use the web. So it doesn't have a ton of like tactical information as much as it has some philosophical components. I shouldn't say that it does have tactical ideas, but those can be dated, obviously. Like the web moves so fast that sometimes those examples aren't as applicable, but the philosophies resonate and persist.
Excellent. We have a question here from Iris about PDFs. If we could recommend the use of PDFs, or do we recommend the use of PDFs to share info on the website? Are there better alternatives or web practices to replace PDFs for accessibility?
Yeah, so, okay. First, PDFs, I don't know if this has evolved in SEO to a significant degree, but I would say that it's less accessible to search engines at the very least, because it lacks the structure that a HTML page can provide. So I would suggest wherever possible that you have an interactive version of that content. There are reasons, obviously, why you might want content to actually not be accessible, but if you want that content to serve your SEO efforts, then find a way to get that content onto the page. So if it has to be in a downloadable, or that's another thing, strategically, there's a value to having a takeaway to providing someone with something that they can save on their computer. At the very least, you want to make sure there's a counterpart to that can at least provide the introductory or significant keyword information, so that it's also a page with a download, not just a download.
Yeah, I think in my experience in a university setting, a lot of departments relied heavily on PDFs. There was just like a list of PDFs on their page, and directed everybody to just click on this PDF, click on this PDF, click on this PDF to learn more. Thinking about that from a user experience perspective, that first of all, you know, not everybody is able to download as easily as other people. PDFs aren't really set up for mobile experience as well. And so thinking about the user experience and what that does for them, it's off-putting at times for you to rely on PDFs. A strategy that we employed is we looked at all those PDFs and we said, does it make sense for these to be pages? So rather than clicking that link into a PDF, does it make sense to have a page? Again, as Eugene was saying, as we evaluated that, as we created those pages to make the user experience better, we also often included the PDF on that page because some of those PDFs were necessary as takeaways, as things that people could print out even. So making sure that you're thinking about how they're using those forms. Again, being very thoughtful about how people are using things, how people are approaching that information, and what they're going to do with it is going to help you with that strategy as to whether to convert a PDF into a web page, and whether that web page also needs to have that PDF. So yeah, we might have complicated that for you. I'm not sure.
Well,
I'm also might have given you more options.
I'm also thinking about the design component of like a website can be updated to match an aesthetic, whereas a PDF is kind of locked until you make another one of those. So I think it makes you more agile to get as much of that content out onto into HTML SEO accessible content.
Alyssa has a question, and this one's more for you, Eugene, as this technical
Mhm.
person than for me. Does Lighthouse add-on for Chrome have the same
Yeah.
functionality as the web.dev site?
Yes. So that's how I use it. I use it through Google in Chrome. You have developer tools that you can turn on and access. It's just a bit overwhelming because it has a bunch of other stuff that you don't need. So usually it's if you open Google and open developer tools on my Mac, it's Command-Shift-I, but you can look that up. But then there's a list of tabs at the top, and usually all the way on the right is Google Lighthouse, where you can run an audit right in the browser. There might be, you might be talking about other browser extensions. I'm not sure. I haven't explored those, but I would, my experience with using Google Lighthouse in developer tools and using it on web.dev is very similar. Sometimes I've seen some differences. Maybe it's because my browser wasn't up to date or something like that. But I would say that they match for the most part.
A question that we have in relation to, and I hope that I'm understanding this, this is from Herb, in relation to the PDF question that we had earlier, he'd like to get our opinion about online forms and digital signatures. What are best practices in these areas?
Okay, so I don't have much insight on digital signatures as much, but forms in general, I can say a few things. And this probably goes without saying, but brevity is critical. Like you're looking for a way to get vital information and maybe a little bit extra if you need to, that in non-required fields, but that should be highly limited. And if you get to a point where your form is getting complex, is there a way to break that up into a multi-step process? People are definitely scared off by intrusive and long forms. Like don't ask for weird information, which might be useful, but like if this is a critical conversion point, then you really want, you know, the basics. And maybe again, maybe as an option, you know, if you're in the process of iterating it and you want to know something when people submit a form, you can ask a question. That is a good opportunity, but just don't ask all the questions, I suppose.
Yeah, I think removing as many hurdles as possible in that form is going to be essential. Another thing, and this is the best practice in survey writing as well, but in forms also, is start easy. Get them warmed up in the form, right? Don't ask them too hard of questions, or don't ask them too intrusive of questions immediately. Start with the easy ones and then move along in the process, because once they've kind of invested their time and energy in filling out part of the form, they'll continue along in the process, or they're more likely to continue along in the process. Also, and this is important, and I'm sorry, but forms and surveys sometimes have overlapping qualities. Don't, as Eugene was saying, don't ask for things that you're not going to use. It's just not, it's not good. It's not a good use of other people's time, and you're going to end up with a lot of excessive information that's hard to use. And so making sure that you're really thoughtful about what you absolutely have to get out of that form before you even create that form is essential.
Something else really quick on forms that I think goes overlooked is what happens when someone hits submit.
Yes.
Like make sure that matches the aesthetic, and it's like sometimes you can use a synchronous response where it just replaces the form with a message. That's cool. That can be good, but make sure that's designed and it fits with like the appropriate language and the appropriate style. If it takes them to another page, that's great for conversion tracking. Like you can track, you know, hits on that page. Make sure that page isn't accessible to search engines for whatever reason, and that when they get to that page, there's somewhere for them to go. Like that it's not just thanks, go back to the navigation and start over.
Exactly. Thinking about the entire journey for them from the beginning to the end, and then what happens after. We have run out of time. There is one question here, though, that I'm going to tease out and then tell it's like read the book. There was a question about what are clear definitions of what student-centered methods are and aren't. I would point you to the luminafoundation.org/challenge, where you'll see our first workshop and some tools associated with that that can help you more fully understand student-centered and the definition behind that. You'll also, after this workshop, you'll find the recording for this workshop in the coming days on that website. There's also tools there, and afterwards we're also going to add a list of frequently asked questions that will also include a list of the frequently referred to websites and tools that we've presented throughout today's workshop and the previous workshop. With that, Eugene and I just want to thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your last 90 minutes with us. It's been a joy, and hopefully we've been able to provide a little bit of assistance in the work, the really important work that you do. Thank you so much, everybody.